So now we're going to talk about where spirits live, just to make things clear so that people understand. There's a lot of people, even though they get involved in witchcraft and sorcery and magic and stuff, that for some reason feel like when they're interacting with spirits, they're interacting with like part of themselves or like their higher self or some bullshit like that. No, that's not what it is. It's I'm speaking from a traditional perspective in a traditional place, a traditional spiritualist, spiritistic place, shamanic space. Spirits are entities that have personalities, distinct likes, dislikes, and will respond through prayers, song, dancing, offerings, and whatever. Spirits live in space. They are non-materialized, non-physical entities that are around us all the time. From your guardian angel, guardian spirit, to your spirit guides, which are spirits of the dead that are around you, other spirits of the dead that we come into contact with all the time that we don't realize it, and then those other non-human entities, meaning they have never been incarnated as human beings, they never will be incarnated as human beings, they haven't gone through the process of life and death, the cycle of birth and rebirth, so they don't understand what it's like being a human being. And for the most part, those particular beings don't have a lot of empathy or compassion towards human beings because they don't know what it's like to be human. You understand? There are hierarchies of spirits. The most easily accessible spirits to communicate with, first and foremost, are your ancestors, your guardian angel, and your spirit guides. And when I say guardian angel, I mean also a spirit of the dead. Not like an angel, but a spirit of the dead that guides you and walks with you. Those are the easiest people to get in contact with. Those are the first people you should be getting into contact with. Go back and watch my video about ancestor worship and how to start doing that. Let's talk about the spiritist concept of spirit guides. Well, it is believed that when you come into this world and you start this incarnation, you will come into this world and you'll have spirit companions, and we'll just call them that. This is not a new concept. This goes back to Ifa. This goes back to Africa, called the Egbe. The Egbe are your spiritual companions in heaven, or your spiritual companions from where you come from that will walk with you and guide you through your life. And we call them spirit guides, in this particular culture. And they're always with you, and they're very easy to call on. So, having an ancestor altar in your home, which gives your spirits, ancestral spirits, a physical geographical location to come down and anchor themselves to or put themselves in while they're communicating with you, is very, very important. It's a vessel that you create for them to be able to communicate with you. It's where they live. In Palomayombe, which is a spiritual practice that comes off the island of Cuba, is very much feared kind of ancestor venerational practice combined with what people would call witchcraft. But it's not, it's shamanism. In Africa, in the Congo, in the Kingdom of the Congo, the shaman or the traditional medicine man or the exorcist or the person who does traditional medicine and magic on behalf of people is called the Inganga. In the New World, the Inganga ended up as the pot, or the spirit pot, where spirits of the dead live inside that assist the Palero. And let me be very specific. In Palomayombe, and I'm not telling anybody anything that you can't read in a book, we take a pot, and inside that pot, that iron cauldron, we will put remains of bones and of people, sacrifice animals, put animals in there. We'll put herbs in there. We'll put, lots of different combinations of things that represent very specific entities or are an entity that's specific to us. If we're guided by our own spirits as to what we need to put in that pot, we will put the things in the pot that need to be in there. They will be fed. They will be consecrated. They will be given life by being fed blood. And those spirits and entities of the dead will live inside that pot to communicate with the Palero. That's Palo Mayombe. Also, when a Palero is working magic, he's relying on the power and the energy of the spirits that he's interacting with, or his spirits, in order to perform magic, in order to get things done. You see what I'm saying? So there's a very real physical component to magic and witchcraft. That is not just in your mind, it's not just some kind of thought or idea, it is a physical reality. That if you're practicing real witchcraft and you're working with spirits and you know how to work with spirits, you're going to get very real world results from the entities that you are working with. It's why a spirit can come into possession or mount someone in spiritualist traditions where possession is part of the tradition. When you call on an ancestor spirit, or you call on a particular Loa or some other entity within your culture that takes control over the body. If your consciousness, if your pure consciousness is what is the most intimate, deepest part of yourself, and we put layers and layers and layers of material things and the mental body, the emotional body, the physical body on top of that pure consciousness, when a spirit gets into your head or mounts you, or comes over in possession and takes control of your mind, you're allowing and you're giving that spirit the access to your body and mind in order to control the mind for a brief period of time, in order to do whatever work needs to be done, and then the spirit leaves. But still, what you're doing is you're interacting with real conscious beings. And real conscious beings, like spirits, it's very difficult for them to materialize in the real world. And when I say the real world, I need to be really specific, the material world. That's why when people that practice ceremonial magic, that are trying to conjure something like a demon, and Solomonic magic, a demon to manifestation, there's all kinds of preparations and rituals and cleansing and circles that are drawn and triangles that are drawn and animals that might be sacrificed, because people will sacrifice animals in Solomonic magic to put out a little blood to call the spirit. There's incense and fumigation that needs to happen so that the spirit has the ability to manifest into some kind of visible manifestation. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, people, to get that spirit to manifest itself in a very palpable, physical way. And there's a lot of preparation that is done in order to make that happen. One of the reasons why Solomonic magicians wear phylacteries, talisman, draw circles, and all kinds of, and hold other kinds of, like a dagger or a sword to threaten the spirit, is because those spirits in Solomonic magic, those demons and those angels, will mount you. They'll come into possession if they can. So that is traditionally why Solomonic magicians wear all kinds of garb and other kinds of armor in order to protect themselves from the spirit, to create a physical boundary between them and the physical spirit, while it's called, and then when it's told and given a license to depart. See, that kind of boundary of casting circles and doing banishing work and stuff like that, that's not the way things are done in traditional ceremonies, like in voodoo, or in a misa, or in a spiritual gathering where a bunch of spiritualists or mediums come together in order to communicate with spirits, or if the spirits come down in possession, then there are prayers that are said. And piety is a very, very important, and cleanliness is also a very, very important part of working with spirits. Like highly elevated spirits that are like good spirits that we want to call on, they don't like things that are dirty. So if you have a dirty house, it's going to be very difficult to pull down a very highly elevated spirit. If you have a dirty body, excuse me. If you're walking around with a stinky, dirty body, spirits don't like that either. So there's fasting that's done. People become vegetarian for a couple of weeks before they go into some kind of trance. There's sexual abstinence, where they don't have sex with anyone. They don't even masturbate for a period of time prior to going into a ceremony to call down highly elevated spirits. These are all protocols that need to be followed depending on the tradition in which you're practicing. Every single practice or tradition that you want to learn about and practice, they have guidelines, they have rules, and you can't cut those guidelines and rules. You can't just be like, okay, well, I'm going to go fuck my girlfriend now or fuck my boyfriend now and turn around the same night and go into a ceremony, you know, with soggy underpants and call on spirits and expect for them to show up or mount you or come into physical possession, unless you're dealing with spirits that specifically like that kind of thing. And there are spirits in the spiritual world that are totally down for violence and totally down for sex and sexual intercourse, and also simulating sexual intercourse through someone, even having participation in consuming either menstrual blood or semen or vaginal fluids and secretions. So we're talking about spirits that are like active. These are active spirit entities that you deal with. And I know some of the stuff I might be saying to you guys might be foreign to a lot of you who have read a book on Wicca and have told you to draw a little circle or cast your circle with your dagger and hold your wand and call on, you know, the salamanders and call on the gnomes and call on the fairies and spirits of nature while you're standing around in your house, you know. Light your candle and call on the god or the goddess to come down. Those are all like very nice personal development exercises. And you're probably going to bring delight to your spirit guardian, your guardian angel, the spirit guides that are around you, because you're doing something spiritual and they'll support you in what you do. So your spirit guides will support you in your endeavors if the endeavors that you're doing have pure intention and they're good and they're positive. Because spirit guides' primary role is to try to guide you to what is healthy, to what is good, and what's going to be in your best interest for your spiritual evolution and development, you know. You're the only person that can push your spirit guides away from you. A lot of people say, well, there are people, witches and sorcerers, that say, well, I'm going to disconnect them from their spirits. That's not possible. It's not possible to do that, because you're bound by these spirits divinely. Those are divine things. Those are mechanisms that have been put in place by God. There are certain universal laws that spirits have to abide by. And these rules that spirits abide by have been recorded by ceremonial magicians, priests, ritual specialists, yogis, Buddhist monks, witches, wizards, druids, grimoire magicians, ceremonial magicians, chaos magicians. All of these rules about dealing with spirits and interacting with spirits have been pretty uniform for a very, very long time. So spirits are very, very used to behaving and acting in a very specific way. As an example, and I use voodoo and Solomonic magic as an example. If you practice Solomonic magic, okay, and you learn and you take the Goshia, okay, if I take the Goshia and I decide that I'm going to, in some kind of way, you know, conjure some kind of demon or angel, okay, if I'm going to start conjuring demons and angels, I know that I'm going to have to perform that particular ceremony at a very particular time of year, when it's astrologically correct, that I have to have the proper phylactery, that I have to be able to draw the proper symbols, that I have to put down all of, you know, the stuff and get the special kind of incense and use God names and all of these things to conjure the spirit. And within the context of performing the ceremony the way it's been performed for a very, very, very long time, you're pretty much assured of getting some kind of result if you follow the protocol. If you just buy a book where you can open it up and stare at a sigil and like mutter a couple of Hebrew God names and ask a spirit to perform this or that, you're not getting the same experience as putting on a full ceremony. The same thing in voodoo. You know, in voodoo, there are prayers that are said, there are invocations that are made, purification rituals that are done, certain songs to call the spirits, dances to call the spirits, musical instruments that are played, drums, certain beats. And when the spirit comes into possession or mounts, let's say it's a particular spirit, that particular entity or spirit, when it comes into the head of one of the devotees, is always going to behave the same way. It's always going to act the same way. It's going to request the same things. It is going to, there's the entity, the spirit, is used to responding in a very specific way. So these are things that are predictable, because there is a recipe for success for being able to call and draw these kinds of spirits to you. And spirits live among us, and they live in space, And that's why it's very mindful to pay attention to the people you hang out with, the places you go, the things that you allow into your house. You know, you might go to a thrift store, you might buy something that's got some kind of really bad juju attached to it, bring it home, and the next thing you know, stuff starts going crazy in your house. Negative shit starts happening in your house, okay? That's really, really bad. It could mean that something's come into your house that needs to be banished or gotten rid of. But for the most part, you don't need to be banishing and cleansing stuff and cleansing your home and practicing circle casting and banishing magic constantly, all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. Because if you're in your own fucking house and you have purified it, you know, you've cleaned it, you've put out wards and protections, you should be able to start practicing magic whenever you want to without having to go through any kind of pomp and circumstance of ceremonial magic. So following protocols are very, very important if you're going to practice a traditional practice. That's Grimoire Solomonic magic. If you're going to practice voodoo, which you absolutely must do after getting initiated into it and following the guidance of a spiritual person who actually practices this stuff. So when you're practicing magic with your ancestors and your guides, you know, there's no need for profuse cleaning, but only when invoking entities that are foreign to you ancestrally and also foreign to you as far as the spiritual guides that you feel around you all the time. Yes, 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 yes. I'm just checking my notes right now. It's the same thing if you're practicing yoga. You know, if you have a specific place that's designated for yoga, and that's where your yoga mat lives, and that's where you put out an image of Ganesha or an image of Shiva, and you burn incense or you put out bananas or some other kind of offering, you know, and you start practicing yoga and you're playing Om in the background or some other kind of mantras or chants, and you sit down and you start chanting Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha or some kind of chant, what you're doing, the chanting, the mantra that you're doing is magically invoking the entity, the spirit that we know as Ganesh, or one of the entity spirits known as Ganesh as part of that pantheon or within that category of spirit. And you're calling on that entity to come and you're almost embodying that vibration. So spirits, you know, are called through a vibration, primarily, you know, through invocation and through language, what you say. So what you think, what you say, and what you do is going to produce the results. And everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do is going to vibrate throughout the entire multiverse. And you have to be really specific, because like I can't just sit down, like if I was going to perform a ceremony where I'm going to try to invoke a spirit of the dead, let's just say I'm going to call on my grandmother Mary. Well, I'm not just going to say I'm calling on Mary. There's a lot of fucking Marys that have lived and died, okay? I could call on Mary, any Mary can show up. I have to be very, very specific. I'm calling on my grandmother, Mary Pimentel, who is the mother of my mother, Matilda Pimentel, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, you could say the date that she was born, you know, when she died. You know, be very, very specific about calling on a particular ancestral spirit, as specific as you can. You have to be as specific as you can when you're calling on entities, knowing that entity's name and invoking that entity and calling them in the way that is acceptable to them. And different spirits have different ways of being called, and you have to understand these things, which is why you do your research. So I just want to check something out real quick here. Yada, yada, yada. I'm going to make one more video today, and the video that I'm going to make next is about the different kinds of magic in general that I'm going to be teaching you about in the future. But this particular video was trying to explain to you that when you're interacting with spirits and entities, you're interacting with personalities, you're interacting with real beings. It's not just in your mind, it's not just in your head, it's not a fragment of your imagination, okay? You're calling and you're invoking real entities, and there is a protocol in every single religion and every single spiritual tradition and every occult tradition in order to bring those entities to you and bring them either into physical manifestation or in order to feel their presence in order to practice some kind of magic. okay? And the interesting thing about ancestral magic, or pulling on your guardian angel, your primary spirit guide, or your spirit guides, or your ancestors, is, you know, these ancestral practices are more familial, they're more comfortable, you feel more integrated, you feel more connected working with your spirits instead of going outside of your spiritual court, instead of going outside of your, if you did an initiation into some kind of tradition like Orisha or Voodoo, going outside of the tradition that you've been initiated in, where you've already been given someone to call on, when you've already been designated as the child of a particular entity. Going outside of that and trying to reach out to some other kind of outside force is going to create problems for you, or can create problems for you, rather than going to the entities that you have walking with you in this life in your spiritual court.